In 1484, the small town of Pedra, not far from Florence, found itself gripped by fear and suspicion. Whispers spoke of a mysterious illness plaguing children, and fingers pointed towards one woman, Giulia de Puzzi. Accused of witchcraft, she was arrested, tortured and subjected to a horrifying ordeal. Her crime, using herbs in her profession as a midwife. The punishment, a fate worse than death. She was sewn up in a leather bag along with a cat, a dog, a stake and a crucifix. Imagine the scene, the cobblestone streets of a medieval Italian town. A crowd gathers, their faces a mix of morbid fascination and grim satisfaction. Inside the bag, Giulia screams echo muffled, her pleas for mercy lost in the rough fabric. The bag is then tossed into a nearby well. This wasn't just a means of dealing with an accused heretic. It was a spectacle, a warning and a perverse kind of justice. Each element of the bag added to her torment and also served as a symbol of her supposed sins. The cat and dog representing the pagan, heretical nature of her supposed witchcraft. The stake symbolizing the supposed link to the devil, and the crucifix, a mocking reminder of the Christianity she was accused of denying. The fact that this happened in a town near Florence, a center of Renaissance art and culture, makes the story even more haunting. It was a time when art celebrated the beauty of the human form, yet society simultaneously subjected women to such degrading and terrifying punishments. Giulia's story isn't an isolated one. Across Europe, numerous women faced similar accusations and punishments. The specific devices used varied, but the outcome was always the same: to humiliate, to punish, and to terrify. These weren't merely acts of violence. They were acts of social control, ensuring women knew their place in a male-dominated society. In many ways, these instruments of torture and the events surrounding their use offer a glimpse into the minds of a society grappling with change. On one hand, the Renaissance saw a surge in scientific inquiry and artistic innovation. Yet when it came to women's rights and religious dissent, the reaction was swift and brutal. The instruments of violence against women remained unchanged, stuck in the dark recesses of medieval thought. They serve as a stark reminder of the lengths to which society would go to protect its own power structures. In the end, understanding these dark chapters in history is crucial. It's a reminder of how far we've come, but also how far we need to go. What if pain wasn't enough? What if her suffering had to come from within, hidden, silent, invisible until it was too late? That was the logic behind a device small enough to fit in the palm of a hand, yet cruel enough to haunt centuries of whispered stories. They called it the pear of anguish. At first glance, it appeared delicate. A hollow metal bulb, smooth on the outside, shaped like a pear. But within lay a mechanism of destruction. At the turn of a screw, it opened like a flower. Slowly, methodically, its iron petals spreading apart, tearing at whatever soft flesh enclosed them. This was not used on soldiers. It was not intended for thieves. It was reserved for the invisible crimes of women. Accusations of abortion, of forbidden love, of speaking too boldly, of refusing a man's advances, or simply of sinning in ways that left no visible mark. With the pear of anguish, justice no longer needed proof. Suspicion was enough. There were variations. Some versions were inserted into the mouth, others into the womb, others still into the rectum. But when turned against women, it most often targeted the very source of life, the womb, or the voice, the mouth. In both cases, the symbolism was deliberate. Silence the womb, silence the voice, silence the woman. Imagine the scene. A damp stone chamber beneath a monastery. A woman bound to a wooden table, her arms stretched and her legs tied. A priest standing nearby, his face unreadable, his presence enough to declare the act holy. The torturer places the metal pear into her mouth, or worse, and turns the screw. Slowly, relentlessly. Her eyes widen in disbelief. Her body strains against the bindings. The tearing begins inside. At first silent, then screams. Screams that echo through the stone walls, muffled by the knowledge that no one will ever help her. The pear of anguish did not always kill. In fact, it often left the victim alive, but broken, maimed, transformed. A woman might survive only to find herself infertile, or never able to speak clearly again. Her very identity, her role as mother, as nurturer, as voice within her community, destroyed from the inside. That was the goal. Not just to hurt, but to alter. To leave scars that carried the message long after the chamber was silent. In some cases, it was even cloaked in the language of purification. Church officials called it cleansing. As though mutilation could sanctify. As though cruelty could be dressed as holiness. But there was nothing holy about it. The pair was not a tool of justice. It was a tool of erasure. It attacked what society feared most: a woman who could speak, a woman who could choose, a woman who could create. But for some women, the torment did not come in hidden chambers. For them, punishment was worn like clothing. A prison shaped as a garment. At first glance, it resembled armor. A breastplate. A corset of gleaming metal. But this was no protection. It was the opposite. This was the iron corset. Locked tightly around the torso, it pressed into ribs and hips, its iron bands compressing the body until every breath was a struggle. Some versions were lined with spikes, digging into flesh with every movement. Others were weighted, pulling down on the spine until the body bent beneath its own burden. It is a strange thing to be told to be silent. Your voice is your own but also a disturbance. Your lips are yours but also a distraction. Your words are your thoughts given form but also a threat. And yet, for some women, even the corset wasn't enough. Iron could crush the body, yes, but there was still the voice. A voice that could question. A voice that could defy. A voice that could refuse silence. For this, there was another invention. A device forged not to bruise the body but to muzzle the mind. They called it a bridle. But it was no instrument of travel. No reins. No saddle. No freedom. It was shaped like a cage for the head. Forged from iron, heavy and unforgiving, it locked around the skull with straps that dug into the cheeks, the forehead, under the jaw. But the true cruelty was hidden inside. A spike, curved and sharpened, pressed down on the tongue. The moment the wearer tried to speak, it cut. Each word became agony. Each sound was punished with pain. The message was simple. Silence was survival. This device was not made to kill. It was made to humiliate, to parade, to shame. A woman forced into the bridle could be made to wear it for hours, days, sometimes longer. She would be led through streets, a bell attached to the frame so that every step rang out, drawing attention, summoning mockery. Children would laugh. Men would point. Women would avert their eyes. The victim was transformed into a spectacle, her voice caged, her identity erased, her suffering turned into entertainment. And what crimes warranted such cruelty? Speaking too much, complaining, gossiping, arguing with a neighbor, challenging a husband, questioning a priest. In medieval Britain and Scotland, this was the punishment for women labeled scolds. But what was a scold? The term had no fixed meaning. Any woman with a sharp tongue, a strong mind, or a refusal to bend could be branded one. And once accused, there was little defense. The punishment was swift. Court records from 16th century Edinburgh describe multiple cases. In one, a woman was bridled for disturbing the peace in church. In another, a widow was muzzled for raising her voice too loudly against a neighbor. No trial. No appeal. Just the sudden weight of iron on the head, the sharp bite of metal on the tongue, the unbearable humiliation of being reduced to silence. The symbolism was devastating. The spike pressed not only into flesh but into tradition. For centuries, women had passed knowledge through speech. Mothers to daughters, healers to patients, midwives to brides. Words were their power, their connection, their inheritance. To criminalize speech itself was to strike at the heart of female identity. Wearing the bridle meant losing expression. No smile. No cry. No words. Only the cold echo of breath against iron. And when it was removed, the wounds did not always heal. Some women never spoke clearly again. Others chose never to speak at all. The scars of silence lingered long after the device was gone. Behind the lies of the Iron Maiden, there is a truth far darker. Because society never needed a mythical device to invent cruelty. The reality was already enough. The breast ripper, the pair of anguish, the iron corset, the scold's bridle. These were not fantasies. They were forged in fire and iron. Tested on real flesh. Applied to real women. Each of them carried not just pain but meaning. Each of them delivered a message, spoken in screams and silence, that women's bodies were not their own. These instruments were not born from madness. They were engineered. Crafted with precision. Designed not for efficiency but for symbolism. And the symbolism was always the same. A woman who dared to step beyond the lines drawn for her would be punished in the very parts of her being that made her female. Her breast, her womb, her voice, her body itself. Think of the breast ripper. To destroy the breast was to desecrate the sacred. To make motherhood itself a crime. Think of the pair of anguish. To invade the womb or the mouth was to silence creation and speech at once. Think of the corset. To wrap the body in iron was to imprison femininity, to turn beauty into agony. Think of the bridle. To pierce the tongue was to cut away identity. to erase words from existence. Each device was not simply a weapon, it was a statement. And the cruelty did not end with the iron. It lived on in the rituals that surrounded it. Public displays, parades of humiliation. Communities gathered to watch as women were mutilated, mocked, silenced. What was this if not theater? Justice disguised as entertainment, morality turned into performance. The suffering of women transformed into a ritual that reinforced the order of the world. An order where obedience was survival and silence was virtue. This is a special episode on a very sensitive topic. Viewer discretion is advised. These devices were not random curiosities. They were not accidents of cruelty. They were instruments of control, engineered with purpose, sanctioned by faith, enforced by law, and accepted by society. Each one carried a message sharper than its blades, heavier than its iron. A message that declared, again and again, that a woman's body was not sacred, not sovereign, not safe. The breast ripper did not just destroy flesh. It destroyed the symbol of nurture. The pair of anguish did not only tear the body, it silenced creation itself. The corset did not simply press ribs and bruise lungs. It turned beauty into prison. The bridle did not only pierce the tongue. It criminalized speech, transforming the voice into crime. And the Iron Maiden, though myth more than fact, reveals something perhaps even more unsettling. That when reality was not cruel enough, we invented new cruelties in our imagination. That we were not horrified by such fantasies, but entertained by them. What does it say about a culture that invents devices just to imagine women suffering inside them? What does it say about us, that we still find ourselves drawn to these stories, not in pity but in fascination? Perhaps it means that violence against women has always been more than punishment. It has been performance. A ritual repeated across centuries in different forms, but with the same goal: obedience, silence, control. And yet, the most disturbing part is not the devices themselves. It is how easily entire civilizations accepted them. Communities watched as neighbors were mutilated in town squares. Priests gave blessings as iron bit into flesh. Husbands ordered corsets locked onto their wives. Judges sentenced women to bridals for gossip. These were not hidden crimes. They were public rituals. They were done in daylight, beneath the eyes of all. And instead of outrage, there was applause, laughter, or worse, silence. That silence was the true accomplice. It allowed the iron to rust slowly, not from disuse but from time. It allowed the memory of women's suffering to fade into myth, into curiosities displayed in museums, stripped of their screams, reduced to artifacts behind glass. And yet the reality lingers. Even if the devices themselves are gone, the systems that birthed them still echo in the world we live in. Think about it. The breast ripper punished women for adultery. Today, women are still punished socially for choices that men make freely. The bridle silenced women who spoke too much. Today, women who raise their voices are still called names meant to shame. The corset turned beauty into pain. Today, beauty is still policed, reshaped, and enforced by systems that demand obedience in different forms. The pair of anguish claimed to cleanse sin. Today, morality is still twisted into a weapon to control women's choices. The iron may be gone, but the logic remains. And that is why these stories matter. Not because we wish to linger in horror. Not because we seek to glorify cruelty. But because forgetting them is dangerous. Forgetting them means repeating them.